women in the Bible who I love to share about and who never ceases to inspire me personally is a little woman called Ruth. And it is a book in the Old Testament, and it's a short book. There's only 4 chapters, and each chapter just lends itself to a certain truth. So out of 4 chapters come 4 points that create a pretty awesome picture. And the first one I call Ruth's sorrow in chapter 1. But before Ruth ever enters the picture, I have to give you a little background. You see, there was a family that lived in Bethlehem, Judea, Naomi and Elimelech and her 2 sons. And within Bethlehem, Judea, there was a famine of bread. And you know, sometimes when we are right where we are supposed to do, and we are loving God and we are serving God, we can hit some pretty desperate seasons or events in life where we hunger in a certain area of our life and we really don't know how it's going to play out. And we have a couple of choices when that happens. We can either batten down the hatches and just believe that somehow, in spite of what we see going on around us, God is going to give us what we need, or we can be drawn away to something that looks like a way we can get what we need. We know it's not really God's will for us. In fact, we think we're probably moving away from God by going to that thing, but we convince ourselves that it won't be for very long and the repercussions won't be very grave. And such was the case of this family. They went to a place called Moab, where there was plenty of bread to eat. Now, in the Old Testament, we are given signs and types that represent different things, and Moab is a sign or a type of sin. And sometimes we as believers who love Jesus with all of our heart, we're enticed away by sin to fill a need in our life that we don't feel is being met. And we never go in a huge burst towards sin. It's always subtle, and we never intend to stay there. In verse number 1 it said, "We will go and live there for a while." Not very long. We're Jews. We serve Jehovah. We don't serve the pagan gods of Moab. It's not like we're going to go stay there, but they have bread, so we're going to go there for a while. Verse number 4 says, after they had lived there for 10 years. How did a little while become a decade? Because one day becomes a week, and a week becomes a month, and a month becomes a year, and years turn into decades, and decades can turn into lifetimes. And it all started with we're just going to veer off and do things our way for a little while. Now, when we get out of the will of God and when we go away from the things of God, we know that bad things happen. And bad things happened to this family. Naomi's husband died. And the 2 sons who had married Moabite women, they both died. So now she's a widow, and she has no children, and she has 2 daughters-in-law. And she finally hears that there's bread. There's bread in Bethlehem, Judea. There's always going to be bread in the house of God. God's always going to meet the needs of his people, because I've never seen the righteous forsaken or God's seed begging bread. So she decides that she will go back. And she says to her 2 daughters-in-law, because according to Jewish custom, had she had any sons left at home, she could have taken them with her and they would have been required to marry these 2 girls. But she didn't have any more kids. So she said to them, "You've been good to me, but I'm going home. I'm going home. I'm going back to my God and my people." And she kissed them and she blessed them. One of them said, "Okay," and the other one, Ruth, said, "I want to go with you." And you may have sat in a wedding and heard this verse quoted, which Ruth said to her mother-in-law, I want to go where you're going to go. I want to lodge where you are going to lodge. I want your people to be my people, and I want your God to be my God. Isn't it amazing that even in a state where we get away from God and when we're angry and bitter, Naomi changed her name to Mara, because names in the Old Testament were so important. She said, don't call me Naomi anymore, call me Mara, for I am bitter. That sounds like something I would have done. Just call me Mara. But even in that state, Ruth saw something of the Jehovah God that was in this woman that she had not seen in any of the gods of Moab. And she said, I want to go with you. Now she knew to go with Naomi meant there wasn't going to be anybody there to marry her, but she wanted to go and be a part of the people of God. And so they go. Naomi's sorrowful, Ruth is sorrowful, and they go back to nothing. They've lost the land, and they have nothing. They're indigents. They're wards of the state, if you will. Now they are beholden upon the kindness of other people. And God has always made provision for people who are down, that the kindness of his people would be there for them. I'm not making a political statement right now because I do not make political statements. But I am telling you that the Church of Jesus Christ should be the primary instrument in the United States of America that is meeting the needs of the poor and the homeless and the hungry and the downtrodden, because we are the ones who have been commissioned by God to take this great treasure and to pay it forward in tangible ways. And so in chapter number 2, when Ruth and Naomi come into this sorrowful, indigent state, there is provision made for them so they will not starve to death. They come back to Bethlehem, Judah, in the time of the harvest. And the provision that God made for those that were poor is found in Deuteronomy 24 and again in Leviticus 19. And it is this: when you have a huge parcel of land that is being harvested, the owners of that land were commanded not to take every little bit out of the four corners, but to leave pieces of the harvest, the barley harvest or the corn harvest, whatever, to leave pieces in the four corners, so that the poor people in town could come into those corners and could pick up these pieces of the harvest, could take them home, could make themselves a little cake, could eat the little cake, and that day they would not starve and die. And the next day, it started all over again. Apparently, Naomi told Ruth about this particular provision, because in verse 7 of chapter 2, Ruth says, let me go and glean and gather. Let me go and do what I can for us, Naomi. God blesses initiative. Some people want bread to come back without ever casting anything out on the water. You know that verse in the Bible, cast your bread out on the water, and in many days it'll come back. Some of us want it to come back, and we've never cast any bread. Sometimes we have to be faithful in what we know to do when we don't know what else to do. Naomi and Ruth didn't know how to gain back a fortune. Naomi didn't know how to find them husbands, but she did know that if one of them would go and do the menial task of gleaning in the corners of the field, that they would at least be able to eat. And there are some seasons of our life when we are waiting for God to show us what on earth is going on, when we do not understand what is happening, when all we can do is what we know to do. It may not be glamorous. It may not be something we even want to do. But God blesses diligence. And when we are diligent, something begins to happen that we cannot see, but does ultimately manifest. Here's what the book of Proverbs has to say about diligence. 10:4, the hand of the diligent makes rich. Proverbs 12:24, the hand of the diligent shall bear rule. Proverbs 12:27, the substance of the diligent is precious. Proverbs 13:4, the soul of the diligent shall be made fat. And Proverbs 21:5, the thoughts of the diligent are blessed. When we, like Ruth, find ourselves between a rock and a hard spot, sometimes all we can do is be diligent. But while we are being diligent, God begins to move and work on our behalf because we are positioning ourselves for the miraculous. And so, Ruth, though she had only known Jehovah now for a short amount of time, she begins to sense in her menial task of gleaning that something bigger is happening. And she says this. 3 things begin to happen. The first thing that happens is grace. Because in verse 2, when she says, let me go and glean, she says, let me go and glean in whose eyes I shall find grace. Now that was a faith statement right there. She didn't know that anybody was going to take any note of her, but she had enough faith to believe if she would do what only she could do, then God would do what only he can do. Sometimes God doesn't do what he can do because he's waiting for you and I to do what only we can do. Don't expect God to glean the corners of the field. He's not going to do that. But if you'll get busy doing it, and if I'll get busy doing it, then he will do what only he can do. Grace in the Hebrew means to stoop down. It means to bend and to intervene in a situation. That's what Ruth needed. That's what Naomi needed. They needed God to intervene in their very hopeless, desperate, poor situation. God's people have always required the intervention of God, and God has always been faithful to intervene. In Genesis 6, verse 8, Noah finds grace in the eyes of God, and you and I sit here today because a man found grace and a family was saved from destruction. Genesis 39:4 tells us that Joseph finds grace in the eyes of Pharaoh. A kid from Israel finds grace in the eyes of the most important man in civilization. Why did he find grace? So that the Jewish people would not die of hunger and famine and be wiped out as a race of people. Moses finds grace in Exodus 33 and 34 to get the children of Israel to the precipice of their promised land. Gideon finds grace in Judges chapter 6 to accomplish the task of defeating an army that was undefeatable with a plan that only God could hatch. Esther finds grace in the 2nd chapter when she goes before the king, and God's grace allows her to ask what she has no business asking and receives what she has no business receiving. Jeremiah 31:2 says that even when we are in the wilderness, we will find grace. And Zechariah 4:7 gives us the ability to look at the mountains of our lives that look absolutely unmovable. They are so tall, they are so wide, they have been there so long, nothing can move them. And Zechariah says, you look at that mountain and you shout grace to that mountain and see what happens. Sometimes there have been situations in my life I haven't known how to pray. I don't even have words left to say. The mountain is so big. My heart is so devastated. I cannot possibly see how God can redeem it. And I have literally, in my car driving to work, I have screamed at the top of my lungs. And you guys know I got some lungs. I have screamed grace. That's all I know to say. I've looked at the mountain. I've said, grace. In the name of Jesus, I speak grace to you. And tell you to somehow move. God was giving this woman grace and favor because of her diligence. Oh, I got ahead of myself. The second thing he's giving her is favor. He gave her grace, and now she's getting some favor going. I love that word. In verse 13, she says, "Let me find favor in your sight, my Lord." She's talking to an owner of one of the fields. His name is Boaz. And he responds, and Boaz commanded his young men, saying, "Let her glean among the sheaves." The sheaves were the long pieces of the harvest. They weren't the cruddy things in the corner. They were the long, full pieces. He said, "You let her glean in the sheaves, and you don't say anything to her." But he didn't stop there. "And let some also fall, handfuls of them, on purpose for her, and leave them." Here's what Boaz said to his men. If any of the poor people got outside their place in the corner, they were shooed back by the servants of the owner of the field. "Get back. Get back. You don't belong here. Get back." Have you ever felt that way? Have you ever wanted something so bad and you felt like life, like the enemy, like your station, your intelligence, your money, your ability, whatever it is, just said, "Get back in your corner where you belong. Get back. You don't belong here where all the rich bundles of blessing are. Get back where you belong." God doesn't want you and I to live in the corners. And Boaz said to his men, "You find some big sheaves. You wrap them up and you leave them on purpose where you know that woman gleans every day." You see, because most of us are creatures of habit, aren't we? Most of us can be figured out. Boaz had been watching. Maybe Ruth came at the same time every day. Maybe she started, I was going to say the east corner. I don't even know if this is the right corner, much less the east corner. Well, let's say this is east. No, we live that way. This is west, right? This is the west corner. Do we live that way? Anyway, where she started. And she'd walk to the next corner, get what she could, walk to the next corner. All right, you can stop laughing now. It's not fun anymore. In the next corner. And Boaz said, "You leave her a handful on purpose." What if that morning, right? What if that morning Ruth woke up? Oh. You know, if you've ever, I'm not a farmer, but I lived in the South, and they glamorized strawberry picking one time to me. I don't get it, folks. When I can go the safe way and bend this much to pick up a carton of strawberries, why am I going to spend all afternoon doing this? I don't get that. But I know the next morning my body hurt. So maybe that morning Ruth woke up and said, "That's it. I'm done. I'm done. Listen, old woman, it is your turn. You go glean something for us. You walked all the way from Moab to here. You can walk from the east to the west. I'm tired of it. My back hurts. My feet hurt. I don't even know a manicure is good enough to do anything with these hands. Ain't nobody going to marry me." What if she stayed in bed that day? What if she said, "Forget it, I'm done"? God is not obligated to bring the handfuls on purpose he has for us to our little corner where we're having our pity party. God leaves them where we're supposed to be and says, "Come on, trust me, one more day. One more day. Get at it, girl. Get at it. I know you're tired. I know this trial has been a long one. This one is about beat you to death, but one more day. Get up. Get up and be diligent, because today there's going to be a handful that is left for you on purpose, and it's going to be right along your path. You're going to run slam into the blessing of God." Problem is, we're not where we're supposed to be. The problem is not that God is not sending blessings. Can you imagine when we get to heaven how many handfuls on purpose we are going to see that God bundled up to leave for us and we never got them because we didn't go that way. We went our way. And they just sat there. And maybe some other weary traveler who God said, you know what? My child's not being obedient right now. Why don't you go ahead and take that blessing? I remember when my middle son Jeffrey played football. He was a receiver, and he was a great receiver. And our quarterback that year was a great quarterback. That kid could send a spiral down the length of the field that would thread a needle. It was an amazing season. They went to the state championship. But no matter how good that quarterback was at throwing that football all the way down the field, exactly where it needed to go, if my son did not run the right pattern, if he decided, you know what, I have a different pattern I want to run. I'm going to run my pattern. That ball would have plunked down on that grass or would have landed in the hands of somebody from the other team, and we would have all just said, what happened? God sends perfect spirals of blessings to you and I. He never misses. He's always on time. He's always right on. But sometimes we just think we can run a better pattern than he has set for us. And that's when he just must shake his head and wonder what. He's been so faithful. Why does she keep thinking she can do it better than me? But somehow. And then the third thing that Ruth began to find in this second chapter of gleaning and being diligent is she found kindness. I love the word kindness. I love kind people. Kind people are the best. Verse 20 of the second chapter said, and Naomi said, blessed be the Lord, who has not left off his kindness to the living or the dead. This man is of kin unto us, one of our next kinsmen. Now, Ruth may not have known exactly what that meant, but I'm sure Naomi explained it to her. And the word kindness there means mercy. Isn't mercy just the best word? Mercy means you get what you don't deserve. Mercy means you made your nasty, stupid, ignorant bed, and you don't have to lie in it. I love mercy. I am a main contributor to the lack of mercy in heaven, if there is any. I access it on a daily basis. Good thing it's new every morning. Because here's what Naomi was saying. We left and we shouldn't have. We left and now what I have, I deserve. But God is being kind to us, Ruth. Because provision, again, God makes provision. God makes provision. That's all you need to know. We don't need 300 rules like there are in the Old Testament. All we need to know as New Testament believers is God always makes provision. But the provision then was, if a woman lost everything, her husband died, she lost everything. If there was a kinsman, a member of the family, the closest member of the family, had the ability to buy back what she had lost and to return it. And Naomi said, Ruth, you're not going to believe this. You could have picked any field to glean in, but you picked the field of Boaz. And Boaz is one of our kinsmen. He can redeem us. Woo! Man, this story's cooking now. But then there's chapter 3. And I call this one Ruth's surrender because this chapter's tough. Have you ever been this close to the miracle? You can see it afar off. It's coming, it's coming. Your fingertips, oh, if I just had longer fingers. and then boom, there's a problem. You know that boom, there's a problem moment? Almost happens. Looks like it's going to happen. Boom, there's a problem. Well, boom, chicka boom, there was a problem. Because Boaz, he had a thing for Ruth. You know how I feel about Hallmark movies. This puts every Hallmark movie to shame. So, but here's the thing. Ruth has got to do something now. It embarrasses me to even say this. How these Jewish people came up with these traditions is beyond me. So, Naomi sits Ruth down and says, listen, the way you're going to let Boaz know that we want him to be our kinsman redeemer, all the harvests are in the barns now. Harvest's over, barns are full. And the owners of the land traditionally slept in the barn with their harvest to keep any thieves from stealing their harvest. So she said, Boaz is going to be sleeping there tonight. And what you're going to do, Ruth, is you're going to go in while he's sleeping, and you're going to crawl next to him, lie down, and you're going to uncover his feet. Okay, Jewish isn't my first language. Can you go ahead and say that one more time? Because I think what I heard you say. Oh, come on. This is not a good plan. This cannot end well. I mean, I've been married to this man almost 36 years, and I wouldn't do that. I'd be afraid he'd kick me. Because y'all do know he punched me, right? Remember the Sunday I told you he punched me? Laying there sound asleep, and I got punched. Well, the other night, it starts again. I'm awake this time. And he starts hitting the bed. And I'm like, no way, Buster, fool me once. I pushed him, and I said, Ted, you're punching the bed, and you're almost ready to hit me. He said, I know. I'm like, all right. He really was asleep. So we woke up the next morning. I said, Ted, you were punching the bed, and you were about to punch me again. He said, I know, Kim. I was dreaming about snakes, and I was punching them. I'm like, dude, you're calling me a snake. This marriage is not going to hit 36. But you've got to admit, this is a plan filled with potential problems. If ever there was a plan that is not foolproof, it is this plan. But Ruth says to her mother-in-law, I'll do everything that you've asked me to do. And she does it. And Boaz wants to respond to Ruth. He wants to marry her, and he wants to redeem Elimelech's land. Wants it all to happen. But there's a problem. You see, there's another kinsman redeemer that is one step closer than Boaz. And he gets first shot. Can you just, without it being in the Bible, agree with me that this man was probably a horrible man? I think we can agree. I mean, he's not some better looking, richer, more godly man, because that's not the way problems happen. Here's your problem, Ruth. Here's Boaz, who's rich and good looking, and here's Jacob, who's even richer and good looking. Which one? That's not the way problems happen. So this guy had first shot at things. So she comes back and she tells her mother-in-law, here's what Boaz said, here's where we're at. What should we do, Naomi? Well, what do you do when there's a problem? You plot. Right? That's what Sarah did when there was a problem getting pregnant. There was more than one way to have a baby. You manipulate. You threaten. You beg God. You bargain with God. Have you ever done that with God? Have you ever said, God, if you let this happen, now I'm not kidding, God. I know we've had this conversation before, and maybe I haven't been true to my word, but I am absolutely telling truth this time. If you do this, I'll do that. How about it? Acting like we have to convince God to do what is his will anyway. Bless us. Naomi all of a sudden got her senses together. She quit being bitter Naomi, and she became Naomi of faith and power. And in verse 18 of chapter 3, she said, sit still, my daughter, until you know how this matter will fall, for he will not rest until he has finished this thing. Boaz is an Old Testament representation of Christ. And I came here this morning to tell you, sit still, my daughter. Sit still, my son. He will not rest until this matter is finished. You don't have to do anything. You just sit still and see the salvation of the Lord on this one. You just see what God is able to do. And so Boaz met with whatever his name was. And he said, so you're a closer kinsman redeemer than I am. And, you know, Elimelech had this field, and you get first shot at it. Oh, yeah, I want that field. I believe I'll exercise my right as being kinsman redeemer. And Boaz said, oh, just one more thing. It comes with this little girl named Ruth who came from Moab, and you kind of have to marry her and start a family with her. And he said, how big is that field again? Yeah, no, I'm good. I'm good. You go ahead, Boaz. And so what this man did, again, love the Jews. This was a tradition. For this deal to be complete, for Boaz to be able to marry Ruth and to redeem her and Naomi, mean dude, and that is why I have this sandal. I have not lost my mind. I know some of you wondered. Because when I lose my mind, it's going to be a whole lot bigger than one dirty sandal up on this platform. This was my most Old Testament platform, or sandal I could find. That man took off his sandal, threw it down, gave it to Boaz. This shoe meant, you now, Boaz, are the kinsman redeemer. So now, and again, I'm just taking a teeny bit of literary license. Boaz goes to the little hut, hovel, whatever it is, where Naomi and Ruth live, going, I got the shoe! I got the shoe! And Naomi knew what this shoe meant. This shoe meant that God answered their prayers, that they no longer were poor women who were going to live the rest of their life eating a little cake one day and waking up the next day and doing the same thing. They now had a bright and a promising and a God-filled future because of this shoe. The book of Ruth starts in famine. The book of Ruth ends with a feast, and it's a wedding feast. And in the wedding that I hope is burned on CDs in heaven, or whatever it is that's past the CD, when we get to heaven, in my mansion, there's going to be a media room because there's so many things I want to see. And I'm going to say, plug in that wedding. And I'm going to sit and watch that. And it's going to be even greater than I've imagined. And I've imagined that wedding. And this woman, Naomi, who thought she would never be a grandma, not only becomes a grandmother. Ruth, who thought, I'll probably be a widow the rest of my life. I'll never be married, much less a mother. This Ruth becomes the great-grandmother of David, King David. I'm going to tell you what. When the Bible says that he will do exceeding and abundant above all you can think or ask, You don't even know what kind of miracle you are playing with. Amen. King David. Now, this Moabite foreign woman is in the lineage of Jesus Christ, Amen. King of kings and Lord of lords. When you can go from a corner dweller to the lineage of Christ, being married to the most respectable, honorable man in the kingdom, Amen. I'm just here to tell you that you may be in chapter 1 of this story. You may be sorrowful right now. There may be something that has happened that is so unexpected. You know what? If God had told me at the beginning of my Christian life what it was going to look like, I may have been tempted to say, I'm going to become a Buddhist. Because I'm telling you, I just did not see some of this junk coming. I just did not. And I sat sometimes in the little corner of my Christianity feeling like all I was picking up were the stubbles of God's goodness. Watching other people bringing in the sheaves, saying, God, what? What on earth? But what the book of Ruth and the story of Ruth tells me is that I am not meant. I may take trips to the corner because there's things we learn in the corner. There's a depth of faith. There's a never say die attitude that we learn in the corner. But I am not meant to be a corner dweller. When I came to Christ, I became a child of the King. I became joint heirs with Jesus Christ. I became the righteousness of God in Christ Jesus. I became a vessel for His goodness and blessing to flow through so that those out there might say to me, what on earth? You look done. You were the biggest hot mess we have ever seen. How did that thing turn around? Well, let me tell you my story, right? Maybe if we never hit the corners, we'd be a little more likely to take some credit. But those of us that have spent some hard time in the corners, and then God turns the situation around, we have no problem giving Him all the glory. Amen. We know it's only through His goodness and His kindness, His mercy. Because anything that happens to me, I deserve. Anything. Mercy says you don't get what you deserve. You get what you don't deserve. Amen. Because of that cross. Favor puts me in the right place at the right time, where I never would have been on my own. Favor puts me right here, where there's a handful on purpose. Amen. Grace means God stoops down when I am at my very lowest. Where can I go? How far? We talked about it at the ladies' retreat, Psalm 139. Where can I go from your presence, God? Where can I flee? Can I be in hell and flee from you? Can my situation be hellacious? Can I be acting like hell and you leave me there? Nope. Can I fly on the wings of the morning as far as I can possibly go to get away from you and you're not there? Nope. Grace means wherever we find ourselves, He stoops down, a hand of love and kindness, and says, take it. Free will means He won't wrestle us. Free will means He loves us enough that He wants to be in a relationship with us by virtue of our wanting to be in relationship with Him, because that's really love. Arranged marriages Very few of those work when somebody else makes it happen and you have no choice. But that day 38 years ago in Fort Mill, South Carolina, when I lit my eyes upon Ted Manning, I chose him. He didn't choose me at first. Didn't matter. I chose him. He was chosen and he was done. He asked me the name of my roommate and if I thought she would go out with him, and I said, no, I do not think she will go out with you, but I will. But I will. You go pass up all of this? Love means we choose to be in relationship, and God loved us so much that he reaches his hand of grace down, but he doesn't make us take it.